What if a genius who shook the world hid a horrifying secret? Friedrich Nietzsche, the philosopher whose ideas tore reality apart, ended his days in madness. Or was it a cunning act? "I became a god!" he proclaimed, but behind those words lies a scandal that will upend everything. Why did his mind collapse? What chilling discoveries did he make in the depths of his soul? And why did his friends whisper that he was faking it? This video unveils the shocking truth about a man who defied fate. But brace yourself, the most terrifying revelation awaits at the end, and you won't believe what you'll learn. Don't look away, the truth is closer than you think. Imagine a man who dared to venture where few have ever tread, not into the starry skies or the depths of the ocean, but into the uncharted abyss of his own mind. Friedrich Nietzsche, the German philosopher whose words struck like lightning, reshaping the world of ideas, was such a man. His thoughts on freedom, suffering, and the human spirit still echo like a challenge from another realm. But this courage came at a cost that remains one of history's great mysteries. In 1888, at the height of his brilliance, Nietzsche descended into madness. Was it a disease that shattered his mind? Or something far stranger, a deliberate act, a final performance he orchestrated himself? This story isn't just about a philosopher. It's a riddle that will make you question, where does genius end and chaos begin? Nietzsche was no ordinary thinker. He didn't linger in the safety of academic halls, debating trivialities. He was an explorer, a mythic figure akin to Odysseus, plunging into the dark depths where no maps exist, where the only guide is the flicker of one's own resolve. His mind was his sea, his stars, his uncharted cosmos. He wrote, and thus spoke Zarathustra. He who peers into himself as into vast space knows that all paths lead to chaos. These words aren't mere poetry, they're a warning. A warning to himself and to anyone bold enough to follow. For to dive into the depths of the mind is no leisurely stroll. It's a journey fraught with wonders and perils, where a single misstep could be the last. Why did Nietzsche choose this path? What drove a man of such sharp intellect and poetic pen to challenge not just the world, but the very fabric of his own being? His life was far from serene. Even in his youth, he felt like an outsider in a world that prized order and conformity. His ideas, about overcoming oneself, about truth born from struggle, about life as a ceaseless becoming, terrified his contemporaries. They called him eccentric, pathological, even dangerous. But Nietzsche didn't seek approval. He sought truth. And he believed that truth lay not in dusty tomes or lecture halls, but in the shadowy corners of the mind where few dared to look. His works, Thus Spoke Zarathustra, Beyond Good and Evil, The Gay Science, were more than books. They were maps of his expedition, journals of a seeker who risked everything for discovery. Sigmund Freud, no stranger to the shadows of the psyche, once said that Nietzsche knew himself more deeply than anyone before or after. This self-knowledge was his strength, but perhaps also his curse. The deeper he dove, the closer he came to the edge where the mind trembles, fragile as glass under a hammer's blow. Then, in the autumn of 1888, in the elegant streets of Turin, that edge was crossed. Nietzsche, the man whose ideas burned like stars, slipped into shadow. His behavior grew erratic, his letters unsettling, his mind like a ship torn from its moorings. By January 1889, he was in a psychiatric clinic, where his friend Peter Gast saw him and wrote words that haunt us still. He didn't seem ill. It was as if he were pretending to be mad, as if he was glad it ended this way. What did this mean? Was Nietzsche a victim of his own mind, or the director of his own finale? And why would a man who foresaw the danger press on regardless? This tale is not just about philosophy or affliction. It's about courage that borders on recklessness, about the price paid by those who dare to defy limits. Nietzsche knew his path was perilous. Years before his collapse, in a letter to a friend, he confessed, "I live a dangerous life, like a machine that might explode." These words carried the weight of prophecy, but also defiance. He didn't just fear the explosion, he embraced it as part of his journey. But what fueled this risk? What compelled him to dig deeper, knowing the abyss might have no bottom? To understand, we must look beyond his books to the man himself, not the philosopher, but the human. A human who suffered, fought, and sought meaning in a world that felt empty. His story is not just about brilliance, but about the pain that shaped his thoughts. Pain that became his companion from youth, pain that may have been the key to his greatness. Was this pain his ally or his enemy? How did it lead him to that fateful moment when his mind, like a star, flared and faded? To unravel this enigma, we must trace his steps, from the first sparks of his genius to the moment when he, perhaps, saw too much. Picture a man locked in a daily battle, not just with the world, but with his own body and soul. His flesh betrays him, his mind blazes, and his heart yearns for answers in a void. This was Friedrich Nietzsche, not merely a philosopher, but a warrior whose battlefield was his own existence. His thoughts, sharp as a blade, sliced through the veil of conventional truths, but behind this brilliance lay a shadow, pain so profound, so all-consuming, that it became his muse, his torment, his destiny. This pain didn't just wound him, it drove him forward, a torch in the dark, illuminating the path to insights that reshaped the world. But at what cost? To grasp what pushed Nietzsche to the brink, we must peer into his heart, into the crucible where his suffering forged his genius. From his earliest years, Nietzsche stood apart. While his peers dreamed of careers or families, he gazed at the stars, wrestling with questions that left others breathless. Why do we live? What does it mean to be human? Where do we find meaning in a chaotic world? These weren't abstract puzzles for him. They were his breath, his pulse. But alongside this thirst for understanding came a companion he couldn't shake: pain, both physical and existential. As a teenager, he was struck by episodes that turned his life into a trial. Headaches so severe that light stabbed his eyes like knives. Nausea that chained him to his bed for weeks. Vision that faltered, making him fear blindness. In a letter to a friend, he wrote, "The faintest glimmer of light is agony. I lie in darkness, and even coherent thought becomes impossible." These afflictions weren't random. They were woven into his fate, as if some unseen force had chosen to test his resilience. By his mid-20s, new troubles piled on. An illness ravaged his health, and the remedies he took to dull the pain only deepened his suffering. He experimented with substances that promised brief relief but delivered fresh torments: dizziness, disorientation, moments when reality blurred like a fever dream. In one letter he confessed, "Every few weeks, I endure days of torment. This winter has been the hardest yet. By evening, I'm so drained that life feels meaningless." These words aren't just a lament, they're the cry of a man teetering on the edge, yet refusing to yield. But Nietzsche didn't let pain break him. Instead, he turned it into an ally. He believed that great ideas are born not in comfort, but in struggle. In The Gay Science, he wrote lines that read like a manifesto. "Only great pain, the kind that burns us like fire, forces philosophers to descend into their depths." This pain became his guide, its flames lighting the shadowy recesses of the mind where others feared to tread. His works, books that would echo through centuries, were born in this furnace. He wrote through migraines that blinded him. He created despite the isolation that gripped his heart. He sought meaning even when life felt unbearable. Yet this pain wasn't only physical. Nietzsche bore another, equally crushing burden: loneliness. His ideas, so vivid and daring, found no echo in his time. His books, which he called gifts to humanity, were met with silence or scorn. He wrote, "I've published dozens of works, but not one has earned even modest praise. They call me eccentric, sick, a case for the asylum." These words carry more than disappointment. They reveal a man who felt alien in the world he longed to understand. His loneliness wasn't just intellectual. Nietzsche craved connection, friendship, love, but these hopes shattered one by one. His attempts at closeness ended in rejection. Once, he opened his heart to a woman, a fellow thinker, only to face her cold dismissal, leaving him more isolated than ever. In a letter he wrote, "I so rarely hear a friendly voice. I am alone, absurdly alone. No word of comfort, no trace of warmth." These lines echo from a void where his voice bounced back unanswered. Yet, even in this emptiness, he kept writing, kept searching, kept fighting. This struggle defined him. His pain, both bodily and emotional, was not just a barrier, but the key to his brilliance. It forced him to dig deeper, to ask questions no one else dared. He didn't just ponder life, he lived it as a tragedy, a battle, an art. But this same pain, which fueled his creativity, cast a shadow. He knew his path was perilous. In letters, he admitted feeling his mind quiver under the weight of what he glimpsed. "My aims have tangled like a maze," he wrote. "I fear I may not find the way out." Yet he pressed on. Why? Because something compelled him, a necessity, as if he were born for this quest. What was he seeking? Truth? Meaning? Or something he couldn't name? His life became a search that transcended philosophy. It was a quest for himself, not just a man, but what it means to be human. And this search drew him ever closer to the edge where the mind cracks like ice underfoot. What was he chasing in those depths? And what did he find there, in the shadow of his own light? To understand, we must follow him, not through his books, but along the paths of his soul. We must see how his thoughts, like stars, shone in the dark, and how that darkness crept closer. His story is not just about pain, but about how a man can turn suffering into strength. Yet that strength came at a price that became clear when his mind, like a ship in a storm, began to sink. To grasp what happened, we must venture where his ideas grew bolder, and his life grew ever more fragile. Imagine a man who doesn't just think but dives headlong into the churning depths where thoughts turn as treacherous as stormy seas. Friedrich Nietzsche was such a soul, an explorer charting paths through chaos, where every step risked oblivion. His mind wasn't merely a tool, it was his ocean, teeming with mysteries and shadows, and he plunged into it, knowing he might not resurface. He didn't write books, he waged a war with himself, with the world, with the very boundaries of what it means to be human. His philosophy wasn't a collection of ideas. It was a journey where each stride brought him closer to something sublime, or to a chasm. To understand what drove Nietzsche to his breaking point, we must follow him into this labyrinth, where truth and madness dance perilously close. Nietzsche wasn't content with shallow answers. His questions cut like knives, piercing not only society's dogmas but his own core. He sought to unravel what drives humanity, what lies beneath the masks of morality, behind the illusions we call truth. His concepts, the Übermensch, the will to power, eternal recurrence, weren't mere theories. They were attempts to forge meaning in a world he saw as chaotic, stripped of divine order. He wrote in The Gay Science, "I carry within me a vast space, but its paths lead to a maze." These words aren't just imagery, they're a blueprint of his inner realm, where every turn could reveal a revelation or a trap. His quest mirrored the myths he cherished. Like Odysseus descending into Hades, Nietzsche ventured into the uncharted corners of his psyche, where the mind grows fragile and reality's edges blur. He believed that in these depths lay something transformative, not just knowledge, but a force that could reshape a person, turning pain into gold, despair into purpose. He called this the philosophical stone, not in the alchemical sense, but as a symbol of psychological rebirth. It was the idea that suffering, faced head-on, could birth a new kind of existence, a new greatness. Yet he knew the peril. Those who venture too far risk losing themselves in the mind's shadows. This wasn't an abstract notion for him, it was his reality. Nietzsche lived in constant struggle, not only with physical ailments, but with inner demons. His loneliness, his rejection by society, his hunger for truth, all pushed him deeper into realms where thoughts grew daring and the stakes grew dire. He wrote to a friend, "My goals have knotted into a labyrinth. I fear I may not find the way out." These words, penned years before his collapse, ring with foresight. He knew his path was fraught, yet he couldn't turn back. Something drove him, a compulsion, as if this journey was his destiny. His works became a record of this descent. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, he crafted a prophet who retreats to the mountains to find himself, only to return and challenge the world. In Beyond Good and Evil, he dismantled conventional morality, urging humanity to become more than it is. These books weren't just philosophy, they were a cry, a defiance, a bid to break free from the mundane. But the brighter his mind burned, the nearer he drew to the line where genius could tip into darkness. He wrote, "I am one of those machines that might explode." This wasn't bravado, it was a truth he felt in his bones. His dive into the mind wasn't merely intellectual, it was psychological, almost mystical. Nietzsche anticipated ideas later explored by Jung and Freud, probing the unconscious, that realm where forces beyond our control reside. Jung called it the hard-won treasure, a power buried in the ocean of the unconscious, attainable only by those brave enough to plunge. But Nietzsche knew the flip side, the archaic forces that could swallow a mind whole, like waves engulfing a ship. He studied myths where heroes, descending into the underworld, often return changed, or not at all. Yet he pressed on, as if drawn by a call he couldn't ignore. Why? Because for him, this wasn't a choice, it was fate. His pain, physical and emotional, left him no other road. He wrote, "Only great pain compels us to descend into our depths." This pain was his compass, its fire lighting the dark trails he walked. But that fire could burn as well as illuminate. The deeper he went, the more he sensed his mind growing brittle, like glass poised to shatter under the weight of what he glimpsed. In letters, he confessed, "I live a dangerous life. Sometimes I fear I could lose my sanity." These words aren't mere dread, they're the admission of a man who knows his path skirts a precipice but cannot stop. His quest wasn't just for knowledge, it was for transformation, for a way to turn chaos into order, pain into strength, darkness into light. But what if that light was too blinding? What if what he found was too vast for a human mind to hold? To unravel this, we must trace his final steps, not through his writings, but through the streets of Turin, where his mind began to unravel. This wasn't just the end of his journey, it was a climax, a moment when all his searches, all his struggles, all his dreams collided. What did he see in those days when his actions grew strange and his words grew haunting? Was it a collapse, or a bizarre, unfathomable triumph? Picture a city where autumn light drapes over cobblestone streets, the air thick with the scent of coffee and fallen leaves. Turin, 1888. Here, amidst grand houses and bustling squares, a man whose ideas once lit up the world begins to lose his grip. Friedrich Nietzsche, the philosopher whose words burn like wildfire, now wanders these streets, his steps unsteady, his eyes feverish, his voice shifting from whispers to shouts. This isn't just the tale of a genius's fall. It's a moment when the line between reality and chaos thins to a thread, and one false move could unravel everything. What happened in those days when Nietzsche, like a comet, blazed before vanishing into darkness? To understand, we must trace his final months, when his mind, like a ship caught in a tempest, began to founder. The summer of 1888 found Nietzsche in a strange state of elation. Living in Turin as a guest in a prominent family's home, he was surrounded by a comfort he'd rarely known. His letters from this time brim with vitality, almost euphoria. He wrote to friends that he felt at his peak, that his ideas were crystallizing, that he was on the cusp of something monumental. But beneath this fervor lurked an unease, as if he were burning too brightly too fast. Those close to him noticed his behavior shifting. He laughed without cause, his face twisting into grimaces he struggled to hide. In one letter, he admitted, "It's harder each day to stifle my laughter. My face moves on its own, and I can't always rein it in." These words aren't mere quirks, they hint at a mind slipping from its moorings. By November, the oddities grew stark. Nietzsche, whose books were models of clarity and power, began signing his letters with names that defied reality. He called himself Dionysus, the Greek god of wine, ecstasy, and chaos. At times, he was Caesar, claiming dominion over the world. In one chilling note, he signed as the Crucified, evoking Christ with a haunting irony. These weren't playful jests. They were signs that his mind was drifting into a realm where the boundaries between self and myth dissolved. Friends reading these letters felt a mix of alarm and confusion. Was this a game? A breakdown? Or something they couldn't fathom? Come December, his actions turned even stranger. Guests in the house where he stayed reported that Nietzsche spent nights locked in his room, cut off from the world. He played the piano, but these weren't melodies. They were wild, frenzied improvisations. He sang, danced, sometimes unclothed, as if reenacting ancient rituals he'd written about. One witness described it as a Dionysian festival performed by a single man. These words carry a poetic ring, but they conceal something unsettling. Nietzsche wasn't just playing a part, he was becoming it, merging with an image he'd crafted. His room, his music, his dance became a stage where he performed the finale of his life. Then came that day, January 3, 1889. A crisp morning in Turin, the streets alive with routine clamor. Nietzsche stepped out for a walk, as he had countless times. But something shifted. On a square, he saw a coachman brutally whipping a horse. Something in that scene, perhaps the animal's pain, perhaps a reflection of his own suffering, pierced him. He rushed to the horse, wrapped his arms around its neck as if to shield it, and collapsed unconscious. When he awoke, his eyes had changed. This moment, so simple yet so tragic, became the emblem of his downfall. For many, it marked the beginning of the end, the instant when Nietzsche, the philosopher, gave way to Nietzsche, lost in the shadows of his mind. In the days that followed, he clung to fragments of clarity. He penned letters, strange yet hauntingly beautiful. They were filled with lines that felt like farewells, final flares of his brilliance. He wrote to friends, family, even monarchs, calling himself Dionysus, the world's savior or a jester. These letters wove lucidity with chaos, as if he teetered on a tightrope between worlds. But by January 7th, his friend Franz Overbeck arrived in Turin and saw a different man. He wrote, "He was in his own realm, filled with song and music. He spoke of himself as divine, but didn't know who he was." These words echo from a place where Nietzsche was both himself and someone else. But what was this? A disease that broke his body and mind? Or something more, a performance he staged? Peter Gast, another friend who saw him later in the clinic, left a note that lingers like a puzzle. He didn't seem ill. It was as if he were acting, as if he was glad it ended this way. These words are a key to a lock that won't turn. Was Nietzsche a casualty of his mind? Or did he, like a playwright, choose to exit the stage, leaving the world to wonder? His actions in Turin, the dances, the letters, the collapse, seem chaotic, yet they hold a strange logic, as if he followed a script only he could see. Those days in Turin weren't just the end of his story, they were a crescendo, a moment when all his quests, all his pains, all his visions collided. He didn't just fall on that square. He fell into the abyss he'd sought his whole life. But what did he find in that abyss? Was it darkness that consumed him, or a light he couldn't bear? To uncover this, we must look beyond his actions, into the theories that tried to explain his fall. Was it a physical ailment that undid him? Or did his mind, venturing too far, become its own undoing? The answers, if they exist, lie in those days when his life, like a star, burned brighter than ever before fading into night. Imagine a man whose life becomes a puzzle that baffles doctors, scholars, and thinkers alike. Friedrich Nietzsche, whose words once illuminated the world, fell into shadow, his mind shattered, or so it seemed. January 1889, Turin, the moment when the philosopher who dared to challenge existence collapsed, embracing a horse, became a symbol of his unraveling. But what caused this fracture? Was it a disease that ravaged his body? Or did his relentless quest into the depths of his psyche lead him to a place from which there was no return? Perhaps, most shockingly, was it all an act, a final defiance of a world that rejected him? To unravel this enigma, we must venture where science and philosophy collide, where truth slips through our fingers like smoke. After that fateful day in Turin, Nietzsche was no longer the man he'd been. His friend Franz Overbeck, who came to retrieve him, described a figure lost in a world of his own making, singing, playing the piano, proclaiming himself divine, yet blind to his own identity. His mind seemed to have drifted to a realm of vivid visions and haunting echoes. But what triggered this rupture? Doctors, friends, and biographers scrambled for answers, yet their conclusions were like fragments of a mosaic that refused to form a whole. Some pointed to a physical ailment, others to a psychological collapse. Each theory raised more questions than it resolved, leaving the truth tantalizingly out of reach. The most widely accepted explanation at the time pinned Nietzsche's fall on a severe condition known as progressive paralysis, often linked to a chronic infection that eroded the brain. In the 19th century, this diagnosis was a catch-all for symptoms like personality shifts, hallucinations, and eventual cognitive collapse. It seemed to fit his erratic behavior, his grandiose letters signed Dionysus, his impulsive actions. But was it accurate? By the early 20th century, doubts crept in. Erich Pado, a German ethnologist, examined Nietzsche's medical records and consulted leading physicians. Their verdict was striking: there was no solid evidence of such an infection. Nietzsche's moments of clarity, his creative bursts even in his final days, didn't align with the typical progression of this disease. Then came a newer theory, one that felt more modern but no less contentious. In 2003, Dr. Leonard Sachs proposed that Nietzsche's downfall might stem from a slow-growing tumor pressing on his optic nerve, affecting his brain. This could explain his crippling headaches, his vision troubles, his bizarre behavior. Yet this idea, too, faltered under scrutiny. Philosopher Julian Jung, who delved into Nietzsche's life, noted the absence of telltale signs. Photographs from the period show no changes in Nietzsche's eyes or face that would suggest such a growth. His pupils remained symmetrical, his appearance unaltered. Sachs's hypothesis, like its predecessor, hung in limbo, a compelling story, but unproven. Without the chance to examine Nietzsche's body with modern tools, an idea never pursued, these theories remain mere shadows of the truth. But what if the answer lay not in the body, but in the mind itself? This possibility, both unsettling and alluring, gained traction among those who knew Nietzsche not as a patient, but as a visionary. His life wasn't a sequence of events, it was an odyssey, a plunge into the psyche's uncharted territories, where the line between consciousness and the unconscious blurs. Nietzsche didn't just write about philosophy, he lived it, dissolving into his ideas like a painter into his canvas. His pursuit of the philosophical stone, a force to transform suffering into meaning, drove him deeper, into realms where the mind risks losing its anchor. Perhaps, in those depths, he encountered something too vast, too overwhelming, for any mortal to contain. Even in his final days in Turin, Nietzsche wasn't entirely detached from reality. His letters, though bizarre, shimmered with beauty, as if he were trying to convey glimpses of what he saw. He wrote of the world, of himself, of futures yet to come, blending lucidity with disorder. Overbeck, observing him, noted that Nietzsche, amid his talk of godhood, would sometimes whisper phrases of startling precision, as if his old self still clung to a fraying thread. This raises a chilling question: was his mind truly broken, Or had he simply ventured where others couldn't follow? The idea that Nietzsche's madness was not a disease but a psychological state, born of his own relentless quest, feels truer to his essence. He foresaw this risk. Years before Turin, he wrote, "I live a dangerous life. My thoughts are a labyrinth, and I may not find the exit." These words aren't just poetry. They're a confession from a man who knew his journey skirted the abyss but couldn't turn back. His philosophy was a confrontation with the shadows within us all, a bid to harness them, to transform them. But perhaps, in that confrontation, he met forces too potent to tame. What were those forces? To grasp this, we must recall that Nietzsche sought not just knowledge, but metamorphosis. He believed humanity could rise above itself, that pain was not a curse but a path to renewal. His concept of the Übermensch wasn't about dominance, but about a spirit that embraces life's chaos and says yes to it. This vision demanded total immersion, a willingness to face the mind's darkest corners. And perhaps, in those corners, he found not only light but a darkness that engulfed him. This theory, that Nietzsche lost himself in the depths of his own psyche, forces us to wonder, was his fate inevitable? Could he have stepped back, chosen a safer path? His letters, his actions, his final days in Turin are like pieces of a puzzle that refuse to fit. Yet there's another, even stranger possibility. What if his madness wasn't a defeat, but part of his design? What if he, like a master storyteller, crafted his exit to leave the world guessing? To probe this, we must look to those moments when his mind, like a star, burned brightest before plunging into night. Picture a man whose life is not just a story but a battlefield, where every step risks everything. Friedrich Nietzsche was that man, a philosopher whose ideas blazed like comets, only to crash in a spectacle that still baffles us. His collapse in Turin, January 1889, wasn't just a tragedy, it was a riddle etched in the chaos of his final days. Was it a disease that broke his body? Or did his fearless plunge into the depths of his psyche push him beyond return? Most daringly, could it have been a performance, a final, defiant act to escape a world that spurned him? To unravel this, we must probe the heart of his quest, where genius and madness weave a dance so intricate it defies answers, and where truth might be both salvation and ruin. Nietzsche wasn't a thinker who lingered on the surface. His philosophy was a descent, an odyssey into the uncharted territories of the human soul, where light and shadow collide. He sought what he called the philosophical stone, not a literal alchemist's dream, but a force to transmute pain into meaning, chaos into strength, humanity into something greater. This was the core of his life's work. He believed suffering wasn't a dead end but a forge, a crucible where one could reshape existence. Yet this pursuit demanded everything. A willingness to dive into the psyche's darkest realms, where the mind's foundations tremble. His writings brim with hints of this struggle. He wrote, "My aims have twisted into a maze. I fear I may not find the way out." These words, penned long before his fall, pulse with both dread and determination. Nietzsche knew his quest was perilous, but he couldn't halt. His pain, both physical and existential, wasn't just a burden, it was his compass, guiding him into depths where thoughts grew bold and dangers multiplied. He sought not mere truth, but transformation, a way to become more than human, to say yes to life in all its fury and beauty. This wasn't just an intellectual pursuit, it was deeply psychological, almost otherworldly. Nietzsche foreshadowed concepts later explored by Jung and Freud, delving into the unconscious, that shadowy domain where untamed forces lurk. Jung spoke of a hard-won treasure, buried in the unconscious, a power only the bravest could claim. But Nietzsche knew the cost, the archaic forces that could overwhelm a mind, like a tide swallowing a ship. He studied myths of heroes descending into the underworld, often returning altered, or not at all. Yet he pressed forward, as if this was his calling, his fate. His final months in Turin were the climax of this journey. His behavior, letters signed Dionysus. Solitary dances, frenzied piano improvisations, wasn't mere eccentricity. It was a ritual, perhaps one he designed. He wrote of Dionysus, the god of ecstasy and destruction, as a symbol of life's raw intensity. In those days he seemed to embody that god, dissolving into a myth larger than himself. But was this a breakdown or a breakthrough? His friend Peter Gast, who saw him in the clinic, left a haunting note. He didn't seem ill. It was as if he were playing a role, as if he was glad it ended this way. These words linger like a cipher, suggesting Nietzsche might not have been lost, but found what he sought. This possibility, that his madness was not defeat but a strange act of liberation, seems almost unthinkable, yet it resonates with his spirit. Nietzsche spent his life at odds with a world that ignored him. His books, his ideas, his longing for connection, all met with silence or ridicule. He wrote, "No one has discovered me, needed me, loved me." These aren't just words of sorrow, they're the lament of a man who felt alien in the world he aimed to transform. Perhaps, in turn, he chose to depart, not physically, but symbolically, crafting a finale that freed him from that world's chains. His last letters, written before he fully slipped into his inner realm, glow with an eerie beauty. He wrote to friends, to kings, to himself, calling himself a savior, a god, a trickster. These lines feel like a farewell, the final notes of a symphony he composed across his life. Franz Overbeck, who saw him then, noted that even in his chaos, Nietzsche whispered phrases of startling clarity, as if his mind still grasped at light. This makes us wonder, was he truly lost, or had he simply gone where no one could follow? Yet there's a darker possibility. What if Nietzsche, diving into the unconscious, met forces too mighty to master? His philosophy was a challenge to these forces, a bid to harness them, to turn them into gold. But the myths he knew warned that those who venture into the underworld risk being trapped. Years before his fall, he wrote, "I fear I could become unhinged. My thoughts are a labyrinth, and I don't know the way out." These words echo his destiny, as if he foresaw that his quest might end not in victory, but in surrender. Even if he lost this battle, his defeat was extraordinary. His mind, even in disarray, shone like a falling star. His final days in Turin, his letters, his music, his collapse, weren't just madness, they were a final act performed with total commitment. And that act forces us to question, what did he find in those depths? Was it a light that blinded him, or a darkness that consumed him? What does his story reveal about the risks of seeking truth, about the fragility of the human spirit? To answer this, we must look beyond his fall, to the legacy he left behind. His philosophy wasn't just a collection of ideas, it was a call to face life's chaos and embrace it. His fate, whether triumph or tragedy, challenges us to ask, what are we willing to risk for meaning? And what does it mean to live a life as bold, as dangerous, as his? Imagine a man whose life transcends time, not just shaping his era but casting a shadow over ours. Friedrich Nietzsche, the philosopher whose words cut like steel and soared like comets, left behind more than ideas, he left a mirror. In it, we see our own quests, our fears, our dreams. His fall in Turin, his cryptic letters, his solitary dances, these aren't mere footnotes to a tragedy. They're a challenge, a question that echoes through the ages. What does it mean to seek truth, to embrace life, to risk everything for meaning? His story isn't just about a man who lost his mind. It's about what we might find if we dared to look as deeply as he did, and what we might lose in the process. To understand Nietzsche's gift to us, we must trace not just his collapse, but the beacon he lit before fading into silence. Nietzsche was no seeker of tranquility. His existence was a tempest, a clash with a society that shunned him, with a body that betrayed him, with a soul that ached for connection. Yet this storm didn't crush him, it forged him. His philosophy wasn't a dry treatise, it was a battle cry, urging humanity to rise above itself, to become more than it is. He wrote in Thus Spoke Zarathustra. Man is a rope stretched between beast and Übermensch. These words aren't just poetic. They're a vision of human potential, a call to bridge the gap between our flaws and our greatness, to weave meaning from life's chaos. His concept of the Übermensch wasn't about power over others, but about a spirit that embraces life in all its rawness, its pain, its disorder, its beauty, and affirms it. Nietzsche believed suffering wasn't a curse but a catalyst. Like fire, it could destroy, but it could also temper. His own life bore this out. Despite agony that left him bedridden, despite the indifference that greeted his works, he wrote on, creating masterpieces that burn with defiance. His books are not just philosophy, they're testaments to a soul that refused to bow, even when the odds were crushing. But his ideas weren't just inspiration, they were provocation. Nietzsche offered no easy paths. He demanded that we confront our fears, our doubts, our wounds. He wrote, "You must become who you are." Inspired by the ancient poet Pindar, these words are both a command and a promise, urging us to embrace our cracks, our shadows, our truth. This was his gift to the world, not a doctrine, but a call to courage, to live boldly even when the world feels daunting. Yet his life is also a cautionary tale. His relentless quest, his dive into the mind's abyss, led him to a precipice where brilliance could become darkness. His final days in turn, calling himself Dionysus, writing letters that blended genius with chaos, reveal how fragile even the brightest mind can be. His friend Franz Overbeck, who saw him then, wrote that Nietzsche seemed both lost and luminous, as if he'd glimpsed something beyond our reach. This forces us to ask, what did he see? Was it a truth too vast to bear, or a void that swallowed him? His fate stirs questions not just about him, but about us. What does it mean to chase meaning? How far are we willing to go? What are we ready to sacrifice? Nietzsche didn't shy from these questions, he lived them, breathed them, and perhaps paid for them with his sanity. His philosophy teaches that life is not about comfort, but about struggle, creation, dance. Yet it also warns that this dance can be perilous. His story is a mirror, reflecting our own searches, our own risks, our own hopes. Even in his tragedy, Nietzsche didn't leave us in despair. His ideas endure, sparking fire in those who hear his voice. His words about pain, resilience, and embracing life resonate like a pulse that refuses to fade. He wrote, "That which does not kill me makes me stronger." Simple yet searing, these words are his testament, a reminder that even in our darkest hours, there's a chance to find light, if we're brave enough to seek it. But his story leaves an open wound. Was he a victim of his mind, or a hero who chose his path, knowing its end? Peter Gast's words, that Nietzsche seemed to play a role, happy with his fate, haunt us. Could his madness have been his final act of freedom, a way to escape a world that didn't understand him? We'll never know for certain. Yet this uncertainty is his last gift, a challenge to ponder, to search, to live. Standing before this mirror, what do we see? Nietzsche urges us not to fear our depths, but he also reminds us they can be treacherous. His life is a call to bravery, but also a nod to our fragility. He left us not answers, but questions that burn within us. Who are we? Who can we become? Are we ready to pay the price of this journey? His voice, echoing across time, beckons us not just to exist, but to create, to fight, to dance, even if that dance leads to the edge. And perhaps in that dance, we'll find our own light, or our own darkness.